Microsoft's hinting at a long-term plan to restrict access to the Windows kernel for third-party applications. This move's aimed at enhancing system stability and security after widespread incidents like CrowdStrike outage. While some security software relies on critical kernel mode interaction and has code that runs inside the Windows kernel, this carries a huge risk of system crashes because a crash in the system kernel takes down the entire machine, whereas a crash in user mode just takes down that one process. Microsoft's developing new capabilities that would allow these applications to operate safely in user mode and gain access to the kernel mode insights through an API that Microsoft provides. Public statements are pretty vague at the moment. This is an idea that I think Microsoft is floating out and hinting at a gradual transition, but I think they might want to do this fast. Cybersecurity experts believe that the company is paving the way for an eventual ban on direct kernel access, aiming to provide the best of both worlds. A scenario where security tools can function effectively without compromising the kernel's integrity. Tom, do you need to be in the kernel, or is an API good enough for you?
No, no, there's no reason to be in the kernel. In fact, if you rewind to last year's rundown, when we covered the CrowdStrike fiasco, I think I specifically said, get people out of the kernel. And here's why I know that you don't need to be in the kernel, because other operating systems don't allow kernel access like that. When you look at Linux or the Darwin kernel, which runs Mac OS, uh, you don't get to play in there. Okay, maybe DOS or older versions of Windows. Okay, let's be fair. Nobody's running those either, unless you're an airline. But the thing is, there's no reason for those systems to need to run in the kernel. What happened is that the only way to get them to run in the past was to inject them into the kernel, and then everybody got complacent, right? Like, oh yeah, no problem, it'll always be there until something happened, right? And we know that the CrowdStrike scenario is the gift that keeps on giving for those of us who write and do the news, because it's just going to keep going and going until someone prevents the system from taking everything down. Years ago at Tech Field Day, we actually had a great presentation from Arista Networks, and they were talking about the fact that one of the biggest advantages that they had in their EOS operating system was that they have isolated and compartmentalized the demons that run the system. Not the little pokey haired tail guys with the pitchforks. No, these are the operating system demons. And one of the things that they mentioned was the fact that in other companies' operating systems that were monokernels, something as simple as the status LED process crashing could potentially knock the entire system out. And Ken Duda, the CTO and chief geek when it comes to coding over there, was just like, why is that a thing? Why should a status indicator daemon be able to take the whole system down? Well, I would flip that back on Microsoft. Why should anything be able to do that? If you isolate the kernel and allow it to run kernel only processes that you have vetted and verified will not crash the system, and then provide access for these other systems to have that access through APIs, through function calls, through external systems that cannot directly impinge that kernel, then you have created a system that is more resilient to failure. Look at something like Little Snitch, the firewall program for Mac OS. It used to be that it did run a kernel module and it required ridiculous permissions to get installed and get removed. And then there was a shift in the way that Mac OS did network stack interfaces, and they had to completely redo it. Now, granted, one of the things that means is that when you install an update for Little Snitch, you don't have to reboot the whole system because you don't have to update the kernel module now. Think about that. Think about all the number of times you have to reboot a Windows box. Well, okay, I'm a little old, but like all the things you have to do to reboot a Windows box because the kernel needs to be updated because in drivers need to be done. Why? Just take all that out, leave it sitting over here, not in user land necessarily, but maybe in like super user land or whatever. And that will prevent a lot of these problems. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. Although maybe if Microsoft hired a couple more rocket scientists, they wouldn't be in the mess that they're in right now.